Hey, hey, hey. Time for another Out of This World story from rSpace. After turning the tables on infidelity, OP traded I do for I'm done. Today on rSpace, revenge is a dish best served, well, however you see fit, I guess. One of my wife's repentant affair partners exposed her. I took everything from her. Long-time lurker here. I never thought that I'd be one day writing a post of my own here, but life comes at you fast. I'm a 56-year-old man and I've been married to my 52-year-old wife for 27 years now. It's been a very long time together, and when you spend that long with someone, it's hard to explain what they mean to you. At the same time, the more someone means to you, the harder their betrayal and lying will hurt you. As I said, I and my wife have been married for over nearly 3 decades, and we have 2 adult daughters. For the purposes of this post, let's call them Sophie and Cassandra. They have both moved out of the house and live and work in other states. My wife and I have always had a pretty smooth marriage and have done very well for ourselves. Let me not bore you with the history of my life and marriage though, especially because what I really need right now is advice. It's taken me weeks to write this, and I've been holding this in so long that I just really need to let it all out. The whole thing started several weeks ago when I received a message on Facebook from a man that I'll just call Pedro. He sent a friend request first, and after that, a message. I had no idea who this man was, but his message certainly caught my attention. Hello, I don't want to alarm you, but I have something very important that I would like to discuss with you. I hope you'll give me the chance to. Needless to say, getting this message out of nowhere from a person whose face didn't ring a bell was sort of alarming, but I eventually pushed it aside mentally because I felt it was probably some kind of scam. He'd tell me that he has $10 million that he needs to unlock in a bank account in Serbia. I was too old and too sharp to fall for that kind of thing. That was the way I thought about it. I didn't think about it for the next week or so. But I did end up alarmed, despite his intentions, when I received yet another message from Pedro. I know this is odd and I know you don't know me, but I know about you. Please, for my sake, I need to talk to you. It is about your wife. That line caused me palpitations, so the first thing I did was call my wife. She picked up on the second ring and she sounded like her normal self. I felt a strong inclination to ask her whether she knew anyone called Pedro, but for some reason, something held me back. After 27 years of marriage, and over 30 years of knowing each other, I'd normally have told her right away. But this time, I felt different. The whole situation made me uneasy, and I decided I'd get to the bottom of things before I told her about this saga. Who are you? That was the message I sent back to him. I knew my wife was safe and sound, so I decided I would play around with Pedro to see what he wanted. He answered several minutes later. I'm an old friend of your wife's, and I would love to meet up with you and talk about some things that I really need to get off my chest. He said he was an old friend, but he looked at least 10 years younger than she was. And when he said he'd like to get some things off his chest, the first thought that popped into my head was that he was in an affair partner. That thought didn't stay for long, but it seemed like the only probable thing with the way his sentences were. Again, after 27 years of marriage, I think you'd excuse me for writing off cheating because you'd think you know someone well enough after so long. We kept talking and I kept trying to pry into what it was that he wanted to talk to me about, but he refused to let anything out. Apparently, meeting up in person was a big element of everything he was saying because he felt it was the right thing to do. Obviously, I was not going to go to Pedro's house or invite him to mine, so I suggested that we meet at a certain public square where I was sure there were public cameras and enough foot traffic. I also took my weapon along with me because I had no idea who this person was. I did let one very close friend know where I was going though. I was a bit too curious to just block Pedro and move on, especially when he told me enough to make it clear he knew my wife a little well. When I got to the square, I sat on a bench and waited for the guy to show up. It didn't take more than 5 minutes before Pedro showed up, looking not too different from his profile photo on Facebook. The first thing that struck me was how he was dressed. A button-up shirt done up to the top, dress trousers and a belt, and nice black shoes. I remember thinking about how it looked like the kind of outfit someone would wear to church. He came up to me and shook my hand, and with sort of a sad smile on his face. Good day, sir. I'm so sorry for pulling you out of your house to come all the way here, but I really need to talk to you about something incredibly important to me. I told him that he could go on because his face looked like he was waiting for permission. I lived a very different life for the past several years, but this year, I found Christ and he has changed my life. Suddenly, I wondered whether this was some elaborate evangelical ruse, especially because I wasn't religious and I didn't necessarily hide that from people close to me. He seemed to predict what I was thinking and quickly shook his head and waved his hands. No, I'm not here to preach to you. I relaxed on hearing that, and he kept talking. As part of my journey to be a better person, I've asked God for forgiveness for many of the sins I've committed. but I also know that I need to ask for forgiveness from people who I may have wronged in a very significant way. I won't be able to live with myself if I don't. I want to confess something I did in the past that you may or may not already know about, but I need to do this for my spiritual journey. May I? At this point, I was feeling extremely apprehensive because I had no idea what was in this guy's mind. I wanted to say no, but my curiosity was raging in my head, so I told him to go on. Back when your wife worked at her previous job, she was my boss. I don't know how else to say this, but for about 3 years, we had an intimate affair. I remember sort of blanking out as I heard those words. He clearly knew my wife. She's now an executive at her company, and knew enough about her and her previous job, but part of me felt the whole thing was an elaborate scam of some sort. I couldn't figure out how, though. Pedro looked at me at that moment with a stupid look of concern, but as suddenly as I zoned out, I came back to my senses and I asked him, "Do you have proof of this claim you're making?" He could just be a troublemaker after all. "No, I don't." And as he said that, I felt extremely relieved. There was no proof of what he was saying, and I needed a reason to not believe him. There wasn't any evidence of his claim. He asked me if I would forgive him for what he had done, and I told him that I couldn't because I didn't believe him yet. And even if I did believe him, forgiveness would certainly not come right away. He told me that he understood, and a minute or two later I stood up, thanked him for coming clean, and I went back home. To be honest, I still didn't believe him that night or the next. I saw my wife later that night and she seemed perfectly normal, so it was evident that she didn't know anything about the situation. She's never been that good of an actor. I really wrestled with the urge to tell her all about the conversation I had with Pedro, but again, I just had to hold myself back, which was incredibly hard because she and I shared everything. I trusted her, but there was some doubt, asking what if what he had said was true. I think that was the moment I decided to do my own investigations, because if Pedro didn't have proof, maybe her phone or her laptop would. So when she slept that night, I stayed up. I always fall asleep before her, so this wasn't out of the ordinary. I did a lot of digging, a lot more digging than I'm proud of. I went through every single social media application that she uses, both on her computer and her phone, but I found nothing. I even dug through her emails to use search terms to find anything explicit that might have been shared. Honestly, I felt like I had found the closure I was looking for. At that moment, I felt like Pedro was a liar whose motivations I would never understand. But when I remembered that he mentioned how their affair had started at work, I decided to check Slack. Let me just say that I found what I was looking for. I guess she used Slack because it kept things limited out of her personal life. There were 2 coworkers in her direct messages on Slack who she was heavily flirting with, and they flirted back. It was the kind of explicit talk where it was almost sure that the people involved had gone the whole way with one another. I would have shared what I read, but I'm sure you'll all understand how unhappy thinking about it, and especially reproducing it here, makes me feel. I feel stupid, obviously, because I was talking all this talk about 27 years of marriage and how well I know my wife, but I really learned a lot about her in these past 2 weeks. A lot. I feel like a fool because I really never could have imagined that she'd be the kind of woman to cheat. Maybe that was my mistake from the start. Well, I documented everything I saw on her Slack and kept it securely. Obviously, Pedro had been telling the truth, and now I knew that my wife had intimate relationships with at least 3 men that she had worked with. It is crushing when I realize that the number is probably much more than that, but these were the ones I was able to find out about. This happened about 2 weeks ago, and I haven't said anything to my wife about it. In fact, it is quite hard for me to have done nothing at this time because I keep feeling like she's still meeting up with these men. So I've decided to take action, but I need advice. 27 years of marriage is not little at all. And I think having some weeks for my mind to settle after what I learned, I am ready to be cold and I'm ready to make sure there are consequences to her actions. I'm not sure exactly how to proceed beyond divorce though, so I'd love some suggestions. Edit. My children are adults, so fortunately there won't be a custody battle or anything. However, I am scared of them hating me for the way things might go. My daughters have always been extremely close to me, but divorce is something I am not eager to put them through despite how old they are. However, they'll deal with it. They're old enough that I don't need to put them first. Another edit. I saw some really great suggestions for getting back at her affair partners. I know a lot of you might not agree with this, but I think I might let Pedro off the hook, partly because he's repentant, and partly because I wouldn't have uncovered this whole can of worms if he hadn't decided to confess. Either way, I'll be back with an update, hopefully soon, to let you all know how things went. Well. Isn't life just full of surprises? Pedro comes out of the woodwork like a divine messenger, not with $10 million. If only he really had the money. I guess you would never know what kind of Pandora's box you're going to open when you accept a friend request from a stranger on Facebook. At least Pedro didn't show up wearing a trench coat and fedora, right? just a well-dressed messenger of doom in the form of a button-up shirt and dress trousers. It's almost comical how he segues from "I've found Jesus" to "by the way, I've been sinning with your wife." So what's a betrayed spouse to do? Divorce seems like the logical next step, but hey, who knows? Maybe you could spice things up by unleashing some creative revenge. Update 1. First off, apologies. It's been over a month since my original post, and things in my personal life have been an absolute mess related to the wife situation. Things are messy, but there's a lot of progress. Well, I took a messy approach, so I knew things wouldn't be pretty. The first thing I did was schedule a video call with my wife, her father, and some of her relatives whom I was closest with. I chose a time when she would be on her break at work, and I made sure to carefully select the people who I knew would have my side. The people whom I've had grown insanely close with over the decades. She had asked me what the video call was all about, but I merely told her it was a surprise and she'd find out. And then the day came. When everyone had hopped on the call, I unmuted myself and began to speak. I'll admit that I mentally rehearsed this because it needed to go well. Pedro Gonzalez, Tim Scaglione, and John Walker. Babe, do those names ring a bell to you? Even though the video quality wasn't stunning, the shock on her face was evident. She looked like she wanted to speak, but I'm sure she couldn't find the words. I guess she was stuck between lying and fessing up, but it was evident that I knew way too much for her to lie to me. This is how you want to do things? Are you serious? You decided to humiliate me? After so long, why couldn't we just talk about this privately? I could hear her voice cracking, and before I could talk, I watched as her hand reached towards the camera and pulled her laptop lid shut. Of course, I had an audience that was incredibly confused, I could see, so I went into vivid detail, telling them everything I had learned about my wife and her affairs. I told them about how I had found out. I admitted to my digging, since I had probable cause, and I narrated everything I had found. Her dad was heartbroken, her brother looked pissed, and a few cousins looked like they didn't know what to say, though they looked sorry for me. At the end of the call, I let them know that I was going to start divorce proceedings. Her dad started to talk as if to dissuade me, but her brother cut him off with a, "Dad, don't." I think it was evident that I was justified. Weeks before the call, I had spoken at length to the best divorce lawyer in town and retained him. We had already gotten the divorce papers written up, and he seemed very confident that he'd get me a fantastic split. When my wife got back home, I served her with the papers and told her that she'd have to find somewhere else to sleep. She has more than enough money to get a hotel, so I knew she wouldn't be uncomfortable. She looked broken, and she tried multiple times, as she was packing a small bag of essentials, to talk things over with me. But the ship had already sailed in my head. I didn't give her the listening ear she wanted because I knew for a fact that there was nothing she would say that would make the situation any better. She hasn't been back to the house apart from once when I was out to pack more things for herself. She hasn't said anything about the divorce papers. In fact, we've barely spoken besides her arranging to come to the house when I would be out. I've also tried my best to keep my daughters out of this mess, at least the details of it, but I know they'll eventually find out. I just hope they don't hate me for it. Meanwhile, I'm also trying to find a way to get at her affair partners, but I don't know much about them beyond where they work and their names. But that might be sufficient now that I think about it. Anyway, that's me bringing you all up to speed. Hopefully, I'll have an update for you all at some point, and hopefully, it'll be a very favorable conclusion for me. Edit. It didn't take long, but unfortunately my daughters already know about the situation. Their cool uncle let them in on a bit too much of what went down, and they know the details of the discord between their mom and me. The thing is, I didn't want to intentionally turn them against their mom, but it has happened, and it was out of my power. I would never have told them myself. To be honest though, I'm happy that they know. They're not kids anymore, and I'd prefer not to deal with them lashing out at me out of confusion. Wow, you really pulled out all the stops, didn't you, OP? A virtual family showdown. But seriously, serving divorce papers over Zoom? That's a bold move, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for you. And kudos for getting the best divorce lawyer in town on speed dial. Nothing says, I mean business, like having legal firepower at your disposal. And as for sparing your daughters the gory details, seems like Uncle Loose Lips let the cat out of the bag a little too soon, or just in time. Update 2. Hey everyone, it has been months, so I don't know if you all even remember my story, but I'm here with what should be the final update. My daughters got very involved with the process. To be honest, I didn't want them to hate their mother, but they started to get that vibe, especially Cassandra, the younger one, and my wife's favorite. When I asked them, they said that they didn't hate her, but I wasn't very convinced. The divorce process went as smoothly as one could go. Of course, it seemed like a 50-50 split of our assets was on the horizon, and her lawyer wanted to fight very hard for the house, which, to be honest, was one of the few things I certainly did not want to give up, especially because I knew how much she loved the house. My lawyer, a real ace, did a fantastic job of putting pressure on them from a different angle, and eventually, one day, she told me she'd let the house go. There was also no need for alimony, which made things a lot easier. However, the way she suddenly gave up seemed a bit odd to me. I found out why she did that, though, much later. She and Cassandra had a huge falling out, and by the sound of things, it was extremely messy, but apparently enough was said for my ex-wife to feel like an absolute scumbag. She had lost all loyalty from her nuclear family and many of her relatives, and I think she just got tired of fighting. She does well for herself, so the assets were never do or die for her. Eventually, the divorce was finalized, and I am now a newly single man after nearly 3 decades of marriage. My wife lost her marriage and her family, but I wasn't done. In fact, I waited until the divorce was finalized before the very final part of my plan. Just to recap, my wife was an executive at a pretty snazzy finance company, and she had cheated on me with at least 3 men who were subordinate to her in the workplace. Yes, she seemed to have a thing for cheating on the job. Her company policy is against such vertically stacked relationships in the workplace because it can be hard to tell when there's a severe power imbalance at play. Like I said, all 3 men directly reported to her, and that certainly went against company policy. Pedro, the repentant affair partner who had let me in on my wife's behavior, was a key character in this. I messaged him the same way he had reached out to me and decided to dig into the relationship he had with my wife. He said that he had felt very pressured at the start, almost bordering on harassment, because she was his boss at the time, but he eventually eased up and enjoyed the intimacy. I remember telling him that it was probably like Stockholm Syndrome. He never would have eased up on his harasser if she hadn't put so much pressure on him in the first place. He knew it was wrong and against company policy then, but he still did it. Pedro, I think you should come clean to the company. You came clean to me because you know you sinned against me. But you also did wrong to the company by breaking policy, even if you don't work there anymore. On top of that, she has pressured at least 2 other people after you, and she'll keep doing this if you don't put a stop to it. I knew I was being too on the nose with what I wanted, and he knew I was divorced. So I was scared he'd see my revenge for exactly what it was. Whether he did or not, I don't know, but he agreed to report to the company. About a day later, he sent me an email he had drafted. I made a few tasteful changes, and he sent it out. Long story short, the company launched a pretty lengthy internal investigation, made even easier since I slid him the names of the 2 employees I knew that she had flings with. She was suspended while it was ongoing, and at the end of the day, she was terminated. One of the affair partners was let off the hook because he had enough text evidence to show that he was hounded by her, but the other guy didn't have enough proof, and the company seemed to feel it was cleaner without another party to the scandal. After 27 years of what I thought was a good marriage, I found out that my ex-wife had messed around with at least 3 men. So, her marriage failed. Parts of her nuclear and extended family blame her for the discord, and she eventually lost her cushy job. I even managed to get one affair partner out with her. I kept the house too, and I'm not paying any kind of alimony. To be honest, this is the best case scenario when someone took you for a fool for 27 years, and I'm glad that dishonesty has finally come to a close. I look forward to starting a new life. This should be the last update, so thank you to all of you for entertaining me with your comments and providing a lot of helpful advice. I hope you'll never need to write a post here like I did. Take care, everyone. Look who's ending their saga with a bang. You've certainly orchestrated quite the spectacle, haven't you? First off, kudos on handling the divorce like a seasoned pro, OP. Splitting assets, negotiating terms, and coming out on top without having to fork over any alimony? That's the kind of victory that deserves a slow clap. But you didn't stop there, did you? Oh no, you decided to go full vigilante justice and take down your ex-wife's career while you were at it. It's a fitting end to a tale of love lost and justice served. What do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today on rSpace. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you soon.